All right, good morning, everyone. We'll get going with this webinar. Thanks for joining us. So today we're going through the cybersecurity roadmap that we put together as Mercury IT, which basically lays out a system for cybersecurity. Now, I'm sure that others will be joining as we go. While you've got questions, please make sure that you can just type them into the chat box as we go, and we can address those at the end. Now, today we've got myself, Chris, as the CISO for Mercury IT, and we've got Martin O'Riordan, our General Manager and Head of Cybersecurity. Hey, Martin.
Morning. Good morning.
Hey, do you want to just give everyone a quick background of Mercury IT? Because I think we've got a couple of new people on.
Yeah, so we're a IT provider, and we do a lot of work in that IT for business. That's what we do. But a lot of where we diverged is actually into the cybersecurity field, and we make sure that cybersecurity is kind of baked into everything we do, not just what our customers are doing, but what we do as well. So it really is kind of that space now that you can't do IT for business anymore without thinking about cybersecurity. So you can't necessarily talk about it in its isolation anymore. I think that's where we've kind of looked at how do we make sure that it's integrated to the point that it makes it seamless for our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was just over 2 years ago that we decided to create a dedicated cybersecurity department, so that we were always looking at it specifically and making sure it was part of our products that go out and our management and etc. So the next little bit now, what actually came of that was how do we actually approach security? And what we found for a lot of businesses is that it's actually a journey that needs to take place, very much like most business. But here we're talking about maturity of their people, so it's the culture, the maturity of the technology that's there, and the processes of that business, specifically at a board level and coming down, and people actually understanding where that fits in and why it's important. So kind of taking that risk-based approach.
It really takes it to that top-down approach where Absolutely. You need to have those really senior sponsors take it seriously.
Agreed. And we're seeing more and more call for that. And that's why today we actually kind of wanted to kick off with the latest report from the Australian Information Commissioner. So basically it's the report over the last 6 months of what's been reported as a notifiable breach. Now, it's probably interesting to note that the number of breaches have actually dropped a little bit over the last 6 months, but I've got to be honest, I'm kind of wondering whether that's more just the reporting has dropped.
I would agree. I think it's reporting has dropped off because people aren't seeing it as being as important.
Yeah, because that's the kind of the feeling that I got on it, just based on being in the industry and seeing how many attacks, etc., are taking place on a daily, weekly basis. So it's not something that's certainly dropped off, but I'm kind of wondering whether there might be a bit of confusion about when to report. So a common one that was actually in the report, which was pretty good, that I thought that they actually highlighted as a case study, and that's a ransomware attack on a business. And the business basically went, look, there's no evidence that any data was exfiltrated. So no data was taken or looked at or etc. So therefore, we don't need to report because, you know, private information of individuals wasn't taken, or we have no evidence of it. The commissioner turned around and went, that's not good enough, that you don't have evidence of it. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. So they definitely err on the side of caution and basically force that business to go and let their customers know. So interesting one. This particular graph that we brought up, firstly, there was 2 pieces to this. Firstly was the source of the breaches. I don't think there's any surprise here, Martin.
No. 95% of all breaches are human related. That's no surprise.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, system faults very, very small. When we talk about malicious and criminal attacks, you know, that's where we're throwing in ransomware and all the rest of it there. And at the end of the day, a lot of that can be attributed to human error or just being human, I guess, which is if you think about like a phishing attack as an example, to actually get a ransomware attack to kick off, we've got to have someone click on something generally, in most cases.
And that's where that human error, the 30%, that really does have to be our low-hanging fruit. I mean, we need to be getting that figure down to zero. I mean, and we have ways of doing that. I mean, the fact is, if we have technology that can assist us, I mean, an obvious one is where people use BCC function in Outlook to send out bulk emails to customers.
Yeah.
That one gets, as an error, is a very common one where they forget to put it in the BCC field and put it in the to field, and everyone's got that information straight up. I've received those from places before. It's quite disturbing when you see that. And there are tools out there that are designed to prevent that. The bulk email platforms, and there's so many of them, I wouldn't even need to start talking about them, but those platforms can reduce that particular error to zero, because it just takes away that risk of putting the wrong thing in the wrong field. And certainly I think that's where a lot of businesses need to actually look and see, okay, what are those small things that I could do to change that one error, or the ability of that one error?
Agreed. The next little one was just looking at the breakdown of the types of breaches. And I think, again, nothing too stand out here. What we would say is that ransomware is increasing. Again, absolutely no surprise. I suppose it's a bit surprising based on the number wasn't more. That's the only thing I would say, but definitely increasing. Phishing, compromised stolen credentials, pretty basic stuff.
Yeah, but that one's still concerning. That 57% is basically stolen credentials, which just is the same thing we've been talking about for so many years around, password hygiene and two-factor authentication on your accounts. That's where we should be trying to get that 57% down a lot too.
Agreed. And there's part technology there, and there's part education and culture of staff. So where we talk about people just being people, talking about long passwords and things like that, they start to go, that's like, who cares? It's not that important, where it really is. So it's looking at doing, like you said, that password hygiene correctly, using technology where you can. Password managers, I'm quite surprised still that password managers aren't way bigger in the industry and just being used as commonplace. But certainly a password manager, two-factor, multi-factor auth is definitely important. Like you'll see the percentage of hacking, 9%. Some people are surprised to see that initially. It's like, oh, I thought it was all about hacking. It really isn't. When you talk about hacking, they're just splitting it up, because phishing is probably the most common way of actually hacking into a company. So they're just kind of splitting that all out for us. Right, which kind of brings us to the roadmap that we put together over the years, trying to understand where stuff fits in, what journey our customers take to actually get to a point whereby the maturity level goes up in their organization, and they have better security processes and technology and training for their staff and so forth. So just as an overview here, just from this particular slide, and this is pretty much the only slide that we will work off for today. But you'll see that there's 3 levels, which is quite important. So kicking off at level 1. So that is really just that initial getting going. You understand that cybersecurity is important within the organization, and there's certain steps that need to be taken. So those are those initial and developing steps, and trying to work out what fits well for the business. Like we're talking about here, where there isn't a line item for the budget for cybersecurity at this stage. It's all lumped into IT, and it's IT's problem and so forth. This is where it starts to split out, and you start to have an understanding of it needs to be addressed, and the risk needs to be taken seriously. Once we've got past that, though, we start to move into defining stuff. So we start to define things. And this is where we start talking about having a defined process of training staff. We have defined frameworks, policies, procedures, etc. Beyond that, we start to move into a managed and optimized piece. So this takes that extra step. Now, what we found, Martin, I think you'll agree, is that 3rd level is often where businesses really don't have the budget, or the technology that's been available has been too expensive.
And one of the things that we do want to try and get across is a lot of this doesn't require large budgets. It requires commitment and some effort, but not necessarily huge budgets. There are costs involved, absolutely, but once once businesses take that journey or start on the journey, they start to see where they can actually get the quick wins. They can start to see how they can actually achieve that. And certainly that level 3, we don't see a lot of businesses getting to that point. And maybe that's kind of one of the reasons why we decided to put together a journey, a defined journey, so we can see where people need to get to.
Absolutely. And it just helps a business to allocate the budgets appropriately, and also not. One of the biggest reasons why I wanted to put this together as well is you'll see that middle block at the top in level 3, the ongoing testing. That's where we see things like pen testing as an example. And the common problem that we see, and we see it a lot, like we saw a couple of weeks ago, again, there was a particular business that said exactly the same thing. What happens is the board members or the directors start to get an idea of cybersecurity is important and we need to tackle it. So they might have a friend in cybersecurity or another business that's more mature and they're doing pen testing, for instance. So the one thing that they take out of it is we absolutely have to do pen testing. And that's what goes into the board level. And the problem is nothing at level 1 has been addressed, or it's been addressed very piecemeal. So you can imagine what happens when the pen test happens.
Yeah, it just highlights all the things that we knew were wrong.
So it's not a complete waste of money, don't get me wrong, but it's really not the right place to start.
Yeah, it's about timing, isn't it?
What's that?
It's about timing. It's about
Absolutely.
when you do it, not if you do it.
And I think you'd be better off if you spend 3 to 6 months to just get some of the basics in. You will still know where the gaps are, then run the pen test. If you run the pen test straight off the bat, you're really not going to get a hell of a lot out of it. What's going to happen is they're going to pick up one particular vulnerability, exploit it, and get into the business and go, there, see, it's open. But the problem is you don't know where all the other openings are. They've only exploited one. So you would be way better off having a security assessment done, or an audit, not a pen test specifically. Anyway, I kind of digress. That was just one particular area where I was like, it always seems like it's the horse before the cart scenario here. So I kind of wanted to address that. All right, so let's kind of step our way through this and have a look at what we mean by each of these areas. So starting at level 1, doing the technology risk assessment. And this is super important. This is literally what I was saying. Instead of doing the pen test, this is essentially what you should be doing first. Now, there's a number of tools that you can use. We use a number of tools that we run on a network that's maybe new to us, that we're coming in and having a look. So we'll run these tools, and basically it's gathering information about whether you're running Active Directory, stuff off your O365 if you've got that, any servers that are on site, your PCs, printers, everything. And it's pulling back a report for us. And that report is pretty basic, and it basically moves into the tightening of the basics. What it allows us to do is to then go and look at all the standard things that should really be fixed up.
And there's a lot to that. There is a lot. There's a lot in the tighten the basics. Like there's a lot of things that you just don't even realize you need to do.
There's a hell of a lot. And where I go, this is a basic report. It's still hundreds of pages, the report for a small network. And it's split out into the security and it's split out into the network. And when we talk about tightening the basics, we're talking about things like it will pull back things like, you've got 12 active accounts, but no one's logged in for 3 months. So that basically what that tells us, someone's left the organization, the account's never been disabled. So there's an example like that. Another one would be, you've got 16 administrators in the administrators group. That's a red flag. So why are there so many administrators? So going and looking at that sort of stuff. And quite often what you'll see, like with that administrator one, is just like, Bob doesn't have access to whatever, just throw it in this group. Happens to be the administrators group. Hey, look, he's got access, problem solved. So it's going through that.
Local admin accounts.
Local admin accounts, lack of public policies like lockout policies, things like that. So this is what we mean by basics and going through. Now, to go through that list yourself can be quite daunting. It's easier to obviously just have a report, comes back, and it basically orders that report for us in a kind of higher risk to low risk, so we can work through in a decent order to fix those up. And then, like you said, Martin, this is not necessarily costing any money. You know, if you do have your own IT people within the organization, they can go through and do this. Even if you're getting an organization like ours to do it. I mean, we generally don't charge for this. It's normally our onboarding piece. So if we start to look after a business, we will do all these things within the first 3 months.
Yes, absolutely. And that's where, you know, a bit of time more than anything is required to have a look at these things. And it does have a massive impact on your maturity, which is what we're talking about. Agreed.
And once we've got that right, we can actually move to defense in depth. Now, defense in depth is nothing new. This has been in the IT security, I don't know, for the last 20 years. I've certainly been teaching it for a very, very long time. And here what we're talking about, there's no 1, 2, or even 3 specific solutions or point solutions that are going to prevent a cyber attack. So what we need is a layered defense so that we've got a better chance of stopping or mitigating at least an attack that takes place. It doesn't matter what that attack is. Now, traditionally, we would think of this as the, Martin, you always go with the castle and the moat scenario here. So it's kind of like, you know, the outside on the way into the, you know, the keep where the crown jewels are. So that would be your data within your business. And these days it is a little bit different. The defense in depth is quite often worked. I think the main problem here is the SaaS model. And that's changed a lot of the thinking because you can't just stick everything behind a firewall anymore. You now have your servers and your applications that you're using outside your organization. And the people are quite often working from home or working from wherever. You know, obviously COVID drove that a lot more as well. So all of a sudden your security has to be pervasive, and it's not just that layered from the firewall in, it's a lot of other things that you've got to look at as well. So just to give you some examples of that, some of the attack vectors that you're going to see in the organization, you know, 98% of all attack vectors are going to come through email and through web browsing. Those are just your largest kind of surface areas, if you like. So that we've got to protect quite a lot. So the first thing is looking at email. So making sure that you are filtering the email correctly. So we're not just talking anti-spam now, we're talking anti-phishing, anti-virus, anti-malware. So that can take quite a bit. You need to be looking for products that are doing things like sandboxing files, detonating those out in a sandbox, check if they're safe, and then being able to deliver that back into your organization. On top of that, it should be able to do retrospective alerting as well. So if it's let through a file that is presumably clean at the time, and then it turns out that it's not, you need some way of alerting, and even better, if it can pull that out of the mailboxes so you don't have more infections. So there's certainly that. The next one is a kind of obvious one, but it's looking at the security on the endpoint. So again, you know, whether you're looking at Microsoft's Defender as an advanced anti-malware, antivirus product, or if you're looking at something else, that's up to you. But you definitely need to look at one of the ones that are like high up in the technology space, you know, whether you're using Sentinel One or, you know, Microsoft's One or Cisco's Secure Endpoint. You'd need to look at something that's managed, centrally managed, and rolled out. But we've spoken about two particular items. The other one is looking at DNS security, and a lot of people don't look at DNS security, and it's super, super important. So number one, that's going to stop most of your C2 blocks. Now, the C2 calls, they're known as C2s because it's command and control. Now, C2 calls are generally used for ransomware. So if you're blocking those calls, or 99% of those calls, then essentially you're blocking the ransomware. And I'd say across our fleet that we look after, which is a couple of thousand endpoints, okay, maybe a little bit more than that. There's a couple of thousand endpoints. We haven't had a ransomware attack, or not a successful one, for the last, 4 years?
4 years, yeah.
Yeah, somewhere around there. So basically, pretty much since we put a package together of the security, the defense in depth piece specifically, and that just goes on every single device. So the C2 callbacks and blocking, that's very important. The other things it does from a DNS perspective is it will do an intelligent proxy, which is very, very useful. So this is a case of going like, the system would obviously know if it's trying to go to a malware site, so it gets blocked. It knows whether it's going to a clean site, so it's allowed, or it's going to a site that it's not too sure about. That gets proxied. So then if malware tries to drop, it's coming through the proxy service and not actually hitting the endpoint, and it's being blocked effectively. The other things it's doing is it's obviously stopping a man-in-the-middle attack there, because it's also doing encryption for the DNS lookup. So absolutely great products. There's a number of products out there. There's free ones, there's paid ones. The paid ones gives you a bit more insight, so you get reporting back and so forth. Cisco bought OpenDNS as an example. So that's what they renamed to Umbrella. So they use Umbrella to handle all the security and intelligent proxy, which is the one we use and works really, really well.
But yeah, so once you've got that, I mean, once you talk about those 3 blocks in that level 1, you're in a really good space as an organization.
Yeah, you have the basics in place. I would say there's probably only one more step that I would add, or as Mercury IT we would add. So as part of our security bundle, we also bundle in training and phishing simulation for staff, and that actually moves us up to level 2 and building the awareness. Absolutely critical. And I've got to be honest, I would make sure that I've got at least the basics in of some phishing simulations and some basic training for staff, and give that probably 3 to 6 months, then have a go at a pen test. Otherwise, they basically will compromise the system, and you know that they're going to. Because essentially all that will happen is if they don't find, and this is the pen testers I'm talking about, if they don't find a vulnerability external to the business to get in, then they're just going to send a phishing email, and they'll get in that way. They'll get into your O365 and they'll move from there. So it's pretty quick. Look, you can't protect everyone, and not everyone is great at training. It is a difficult one to get in place because you're talking about culture. This is not just I can install some product and I'll be safe. Unfortunately not. What you're trying to install is culture, and you're trying to get a change of culture across your organization. It's not easy. You have to work closely with the board. Again, as Martin said, very much a top-down. You have to have your CEO, your CIOs, your general managers, etc., very, very on board with this and make it important to the business. We are finding a lot of businesses starting to take this very seriously and starting to build that training into KPIs for staff. Whether that works for an organization, I don't know. It sounds heavy-handed to me, but for some businesses that might work.
But it is, as you say about the culture, it is a little bit similar to what we saw with the workplace health and safety shift many years ago, where we had to work constantly at reminding people of the same things over and over before it started becoming ingrained in what they did, or that they thought about that safety first culture, which is what we talk about, having a cybersecurity first culture in place.
Agreed, absolutely. So absolutely important. There's a lot of great products out there that can help you with your reporting, your phishing simulations, etc. Whether you use Mimecast, KnowBe4, There's some great ones out there. Personally, we use KnowBe4 to manage all our clients out there. And yeah, I couldn't fault the product, I've got to be honest. It works really, really well. Especially its AI phishing feature, which is awesome.
It's good.
Just moving on though to the next bit. So this is where we start to see maturity shift, I think, in an organization, where we start to look at, right, what framework are we trying to map into so that we're not kind of doing stuff piecemeal. You know, all the stuff we've spoken about is kind of the basics and get that in. The next bit is kind of taking that extra step. And what we mean by a framework is something that's well developed and well understood. So there's probably 2 frameworks that we tend to stick to, but there are others out there. And that's the Nist cybersecurity framework, which I've done numerous videos on before as well. So you can go back and have a look at that on our website. And the other one is something like ISO 27001. So that is if you're going down that full-on audited path. If you're not going down the full audit path, I mean, it is rigorous and therefore does cost a lot of money, then Nist is probably a better way to go and go with that piece. Coming on from that, though, is deploying those policies and procedures. And this is not just around Nist. This will be around your DR policies, you know, whether it's your backup policies, governance, risk management, all those bits and pieces, including a response plan to a cybersecurity incident. And bear in mind all those stats and everything we showed you beforehand. It is that information commissioner that pretty much insists that you have a response plan. It's quite important, which is why pretty much most of our customers have a response plan documented, and we manage that as well. Right, which kind of moves us to level 3, which is that extra step. And like I said, traditionally, a lot of customers haven't moved into this piece just because of the costs involved. And what we've found is that there are pieces of technology, etc., that have come down on cost that do actually work. They can fit the budget and we can make it fit. And what we're talking about here is like setting up a security operations center. Setting up your own one, incredibly difficult because generally there's a lack of talent, is what we found, Martin. It's
yeah, absolutely. And being able to do that in a consistent manner is difficult.
Yeah, so if you're setting up, for instance, a 24/7 operations center, running that can be quite difficult. So you would have to look at things like offshoring, I suppose, would be a good way of balancing how you're going to manage that. So I'd say for a lot of businesses that would look to outsource this would be the easier option and more effective option as well, as opposed to trying to run it yourself internally. Not saying you can't do it, but it's definitely going to take some dedication. And the technology pieces that we're talking about here are things like a SIEM. So you're looking at your security information and event management systems, and also your security orchestration systems as well, so automation and orchestration. So again, there's a lot of great products out there. Not all of them are cost effective in what you're going to use. Some of the larger organizations will use things like Splunk and a couple of other things bolted on to manage it. There are other solutions that kind of take things like a SIEM, like Splunk, and a bunch of other things like vulnerability assessments and kind of pulls them all together. So there's kind of 9 elements that they just pull all together into a single product. Ones like that would be things like Darktrace. Another one would be AT&T's Alien Vault is a good one. So there's a bunch of them out there that can be used. But bear in mind, it's not just about the technology. It's going to be about the people managing that and then reacting to those alerts and running those playbooks consistently. So I think the stats are still somewhere like 50% of all alerts are ignored, which is great fun.
It is. But that's so important. And yeah, we've actually worked pretty hard to come up with some innovative ways of delivering the capability without necessarily delivering that really enterprise level cost alongside it. So I think that's where a lot of people have looked at, you know, that operations center and thought we just kind of reached that, and it is now. It's in everyone's grasp now.
Yeah, pretty much. And just for the people on the call, just wanting to know, well, what do you mean by cost? Like we will basically come in at around $20 per user per month to set up a security operations center. So, but it depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for 24/7, etc., obviously costs do go up. But we're not talking traditional costs like starting at 100K a month type scenario. Well, depending on how many clients you have. So from there, we move on to ongoing testing. And as I alluded to right in the beginning of this, we're talking about things like pen testing and vulnerability testing and vulnerability assessments. So this is the type of testing that we're talking about. And honestly, again, if you run a pen test or have one done for you and you don't have the basics in place, or even if you do have the basics in place and you don't have a security operations center, again, the report is going to highlight that, because essentially what's going to happen is they will get in on a normal user account, then they will escalate the privileges of that user account. And as soon as that's happened, technically your SIEM or your security operations center should have seen that and alerted the organization. And then you get going on, right, how do I mitigate this threat? Because that's what the pen test is. It's a threat. And it's to see how your organization reacts to that threat. So if you don't do anything or you don't even see it, then that's certainly going to be in the pen test report as well, that there's a lack of visibility.
And a lot of those documents are living documents too, and that's important. Your risk assessment, your technology risk assessment is something that you would be constantly reviewing throughout this process and making sure that it's up to date.
Yeah, well, things change all the time. So you change or add a new piece of technology in, or it's a new SaaS, or it's a new this, whatever function gets added to the business, it kind of has to run through the same process again to make sure that it's covered, you know. Which finally we come to compliance and reporting, which you'll find not all businesses, but you'll see some businesses are going to be a lot more dominant on the compliance and reporting. If there's a lot of reporting function for them because they in like accounting, so the financial services is a good one as an example. Another one would be organizations working with the government. If they've got contracts with government, there's going to be a lot of compliance and reporting there. And this is where we see things like compliance to cyber insurance, which is a really interesting one because they're starting to have a lot more kind of reporting duty from a business. It's not just a case of, yeah, sure, here's your cyber insurance that you've paid for. And even then, we have seen cases where a organization does get attacked, they lose money and they claim or try to claim on the cyber insurance, which then gets denied because the insurance company turns around and goes, you didn't do X. In this particular case, it wasn't that they didn't do cyber awareness training with staff in that particular case.
And the cybersecurity insurance companies are getting a lot tighter on how they even take on a policy. They want to tick a lot of those boxes up front before they'll even give you a policy or even sell you a policy.
Absolutely, and it's come a little bit more than a tick box exercise now. It might be initially a tick box exercise to get the insurance, but if you do suffer a cyber attack, then they're going to want a full report, and then you're going to have to prove. So that box that you tick that says you did X, you're going to have to then prove that you did X. So we've got a product that we actually use, a compliance manager that we actually install. So if you're trying to comply against either cyber security or maybe the Nist framework, it's actually doing continual assessment on your business. So if you do suffer an attack and you with, let's say, Chubb insurance, we'd actually be able to go onto our compliance manager and actually generate a Chubb specific report, actually. So it's in their format and it gives them exactly what they want to see to make that claim go through. So kind of interesting.
It is. And look, it is a changing space as well. So, we've seen, that cybersecurity insurance space change quite a lot, even to the point that companies that were doing it have elected not to now because the risks are getting so extreme.
Yeah, they are. And I think what we're seeing is there's a lot of limits going in place now as well. Yeah. So they're not going to just pay you out the $1 million that you lost because it's capped at 250K and that's all they'll pay out. So it's an interesting one. You've got to read the policies very carefully. Alrighty, I am conscious of time. We're moving on pretty quickly, so I think we'll just move into if we do have any questions, we can get those done. There's just some of our contact details up on the screen. We will send follow-up email those with those details. I'm just going to end this presentation and just see if we've got any questions. And again, if you don't have questions now, that's cool as well. Feel free to reach out to us. More than happy to have a chat and have a call with any one of you. If you want to discuss your requirements for your business, we can have a chat about that as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I know that cybersecurity is becoming a little bit more topical, certainly in the media, and you're starting to see a lot of individuals targeted, and you can start to see where that relates into the business environment. So I think everyone's probably received some of those text messages that have been going around recently. Constant, and they are quite insidious, and they are certainly catching a lot of individuals out, and you will see where those can translate into both a personal space and a business space. So we've got a question there.
Cool. What do we have? Oh, that's a very good question. It's a difficult one. It's a very, very difficult one. Yeah, like even the Nist cybersecurity framework adjusted their framework for supply chain attacks. So that became a very, very big topic, and it was a whole extra section that got added in. So look, like I said, there's not a hell of a lot you're going to be able to do. I would say, like with the larger ones, like if you take like Microsoft as an example. So if you're an O365 customer, you know, you are pretty much reliant on what sort of security they've got in place. Now, don't get me wrong, they will have their SOC 2 assessment and they'll have that all listed and you can go through. I would say that you probably would need to be more aware of your smaller suppliers, because quite often they're not going to have the kind of cash that Microsoft does to kind of handle that. So with the smaller ones, I would be doing some sort of audit. I mean, whether that's just getting on a phone with them and going through and trying to get an idea of how they approach their security is, and again, I know that takes more time from you and your business, but it would probably be quite important to do that. And what you'll find is that the governments are starting to take that quite seriously. So their contractors and then subcontractors of contractors, they're starting to audit and making sure, you know, to the point where they're assigning IRAP assessors and so forth. So that is quite important. But yeah, that's a good question though. That is a complicated one.
It is, and there's sometimes, because you've got a lot of reliance on some of those vendors, it becomes quite difficult even moving away after they've been breached, because you may have so much tied up in that particular vendor that it's quite difficult to move to something else at that point in time.
Yeah, and look, and it's not always the vendor's fault specifically. Like I know the SolarWinds one, for instance, was very complex. Like there was a lot of work, and I suppose if you have a state-based attacking a vendor so surreptitiously, that could be quite scary. I mean, the ones that have taken a laxed view, I would definitely be a bit more, yeah, maybe we need to move vendor. But I suppose that's got to be taken on a case-by-case basis. So an interesting one.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Not sure if we've got any others. Like I said, by all means, do reach out via email, phone, via our website. We do have some other videos up, like with the Nist videos, and I actually go through the 5 functions with you. So you can have a look at that. So we will wrap it up there, I guess. I will leave you just with one thing that I read yesterday, which was super interesting. So just this little tidbit. New attack vector, right? I say new. It's not new, but it's going to become more prevalent. QR codes. Think about it, with COVID, everybody's so used to scanning a QR code without even thinking about it right now, right? And what most people don't realize is that a QR code is not just going to open a website. A QR code can do like 10 things. It can even make a phone call on your behalf. It can send an SMS. It can send an email. So do think about it. An interesting one I saw the other day was where a hacker literally just stuck their QR code over another one, like on a table for payment. Keep that in mind. Stay safe.
Thanks. Thanks everyone.
For joining us, people. Cheers.
See ya.